We're going to present today the Jarvis cylinder style stunners, clamp retained stunners. There's 3 different models: the standard duty stunner, the long bolt standard duty, and the super heavy duty used for cows and bulls. We're going to talk first about safety in handling of this tool, and then troubleshooting for operators. First and foremost, all of these stunners are configured with a safety device that completely disables the tool when used properly and in proper maintenance condition. So the way the mechanical safety works is it basically locks the firing pin from being able to travel and strike the power load on the tool. Right now it's in safe mode. To make it in fire mode, we simply rotate the safety cap 1/4 turn, and you will see that it's now in fire mode, but it also releases the travel of the firing pin. If you look at this gap, it's very easy to put it back into safety. We simply rotate counterclockwise until it stops, and now we're back in fire or safety mode, and it also locks the travel. All of the clamp retained Jarvis tools have the manual safety, as you can see, and they all operate the same way no matter which style of captive bolt tool that you're using. Very important in terms of safety and operating of these tools is always assume if the tool is assembled that that tool is loaded with a live power load in it. So in that case, if you were to approach a tool in this position, assume it's loaded. Stay away from the trigger button and stay away from the business end of the tool itself, the end of the barrel or muzzle. What you want to do is pick it up by the breech cover, away from the trigger, and rotate it to disassemble it to determine whether or not there's a cartridge in the chamber. It is recommended that when these tools are in plant, that they should not be stored assembled. They should always be stored in 2 pieces. That way it takes out all of the guesswork for the next operator that might use this particular tool. Also, from a safety standpoint, when working with coworkers, we want to make sure that we keep all of our fellow employees safe. When handing this tool off to other employees, it's important to know the business end of the tool, the dangerous end of the tool. You should never hand it off in this position. You should never hand the tool off in this position. It should always be handed off, broken apart in 2 pieces, like that. The safest method to take care of handing the tool off. As mentioned, you should never leave this tool laying about throughout the plant in your work area with a live cartridge in it, whether it's in safe mode or if it's not in use. It should always just be unloaded, no live cartridge in it. It's the safest manner with which to store it. Clamp retained stunners, or free flight stunners as I call them, what that means is there's very high travel distance for the bolt. We want to make sure on a clamp retained stunner there are 4 components that hold the bolt in position, the proper position before firing, to get the maximum speed out of the bolt and penetration and proper stun of the animal. Those 4 components can break down over time and become weak. There's a very simple shake test. We want to make sure there's no cartridge in the chamber. We're going to assemble it, and very simply, we're going to shake this tool 2 or 3 times. If the penetrating rod drops out of the end of the barrel at any point during that test, that tool should be taken out of production and brought back into maintenance so they can address any of the retention systems, the 4 retention systems. Another component before the tool is used each day, you want to make sure that the firing cap assembly is in proper working condition. What we want to test for and check is to make sure that our safety is working properly, meaning it only turns a 1/4 turn in either direction and stops. We also want to make sure there are 2 flats on the inner safety. This should be tight. I should never be able to turn that by hand. If this whole assembly turns repeatedly and I can take it apart, that tool should be taken out of service and brought back into maintenance so they can address that and tighten it down. In addition, this rubber sleeve, the locking collar, is actually designed to hold the firing cap assembly and the barrel breech assembly firmly together to make ready to fire. When it's in this position, it should not be loose and sloppy. There should be no cracks, gouges, splits, anything on this part of the breech cover, the locking cover, and it should not move. It should be firm where you cannot turn it and remove it. If it is easily removed, you can slide it up and down and take it off. That tool should be taken out of service and the breech locking cover should be replaced. To make ready to fire, it's a very simple process. We put a live power load into the chamber. Make sure we're in safe mode. We cock the tool. It's in firing mode there. We assemble the 2 pieces together. And when you are within 2 to 3 feet of the animal, the intended use, I hold it with 2 fingers away from the triggers. I squeeze with the 2 fingers. Safest method. Rotate to fire. When I'm ready to use the tool, I'd place it on the animal's head and squeeze the trigger. I reverse that. When I take it apart, I rotate back to safety, disassemble the firing cap, and I would extract the tool, or the cartridge, the power load. Take the power load out here. So let's talk about the maintenance and cleaning procedures for the clamp retained C-type stunners from Jarvis. We're going to first start with the barrel and breech assembly. We're going to take the breech off, take the penetrating rod out, those are the main components, the wear parts of the tool. We'll start with the barrel first. So on the barrel, we want to make sure that we inspect it. We especially want to pay attention to the retaining pin area. There's 2 very small areas that could potentially become cracked with use. We want to make sure that we're inspecting that area to make sure that there's no hairline cracks. We also want to inspect on the inside bore of the bolt, where the bolt travels through. We want to make sure that that inside bore is nice and true. There's no hollowing out of it or elongating. You'll also notice on the inside of the barrel, it needs to be cleaned. And the way we do that is first we can take a rag and we can take that in there and clean that out. In some cases, we may have to use some type of a gun oil or gun cleaning solution to put on the rag. We may also have to use a cleaning brush to clean it. It's a steel brush. Also, on the barrel, we have the retention system. There's 4 components to the retention system. We simply put the barrel into a vise, and we would use a punch and a hammer and drive that particular pin out, and that'll release those components. The components that we're talking about are here. So the first component that goes in and the part that wears the fastest would be the retention spring. To put a new retention spring in, simply plug the hole and drop that spring in, And now you can see that that spring is located and seated into the proper position. Next is the collar ball. We drop that in, and again, you can see where it's seated here. It's in the proper position. Next, we would put in our collar. And we want to make sure we put it in the proper way. Notice there's a wide and a narrow. We want the wide side to be in the upwards position. Once assembled, it's suggested that we take either an old bolt ground down or a punch and put it through to drive our pin back into the barrel to lock that all in place. We would take a hammer and on a bench vise and drive that in. Next, we have a locking O-ring. Locking O-ring actually seats inside the barrel onto the ledge. The locking O-ring is important. It helps to hold the breech and barrel assembly together. We just simply wipe this down with a rag and inspect it. Make sure that it's not broken. Make sure it's not smashed or overly thin. If you've got any of those conditions present, just go ahead and replace that O-ring. No oils or anything unused on that. Next are our buffers. Notice there's two black and a red sandwiched between the two. The blacks are very firm. You want to inspect these. Use just a dry rag. We don't want to use any kind of a gun cleaning solution or oil on these. Dry is perfectly fine. We want to make sure if there's any splits or cracks or gouges, excessive material missing in the inside diameter, we would want to replace that. It's not necessary to replace all three if only one is damaged. So we just want to check all three, and like I say, wipe them down with a clean rag, no oil. The penetrating rod, should inspect it for any hairline cracks. What we want to do is make sure that we clean the rod, especially on the piston end and at the top or the dished out end of the stunning rod. A simple 3M scratch pad or scratch pad like this, simply rubbing all over. We want to remove any excess gunpowder, any other debris that might accumulate. This is a brand new rod here. Do note that if you've used this particular tool, there will be some burn and staining. You will not ever be able to remove that to a complete polished new look. You want to take this and also the green scratch pad and wipe down the stem and get any excess debris, rust, anything else that might accumulate on it. It's especially to note that on the stunning rods, on the penetrating end of the rod, you want to make sure the inside edge is sharp. We never want to take anything that would remove metal. We don't want to use emery cloth, grinders, files, anything of that nature to remove or try to sharpen this bolt. It's also important to note that it's hollow to about 5/8 of an inch. We want to make sure if there's any debris, excess debris inside the bolt, such as bone chips, flesh, anything like that, we want to make sure that we clean that out. We use some type of a pick or something and clean that material out of there. Oftentimes the bone chip, when the tool is being used, that bone chip becomes a piece of material that goes through the brain cavity and does more destruction. We want to make sure that that's clean so that that effect can happen. Next, on the breech, we want to inspect the breech. It's especially important to note there are 3 cutouts on the breech. Those are purposely machined into the breech. The way we clean this, again, we would use any gun cleaning solution if needed. If there's heavy debris buildup or if there's any rust inside the breech, we can use the steel brush when necessary. If we have heavy debris buildup, we can use the brass brush if it's light, and we can rotate that in and out. Oftentimes using this type of a brush on a drill, having a 1/2 inch drill helps in the rotation and cleaning process. If there's not heavy debris buildup, sometimes we can clean with a 3M scratch pad or a scratch pad, clean it out, and then use a rag and finish that. It's especially important to note to make sure that we inspect the top portion of the inside top portion of the breech. It's easily done using a finger, and we rub our finger through that inside dimension just to feel for any pitting or any other damage that might be inside the breech. It will be several shots, several uses before you start to see that type of damage inside. The breech cover should be removed. We can now inspect the rest of the breech to make sure we're checking for hairline cracks. Hairline cracks in the threads are here, or with extended use. The extractor, I don't recommend taking the extractor off unless there's damage to it. If it's operational, I leave the extractor in place. There's a plunger and a plunger spring. To remove it, we compress that plunger and pull the cap off and replace the spring for that particular part. The breech cover, you can see there's a interior ring about 5/8 of an inch. We want to make sure that that ring on the locking cover is in good condition. It is not broken down, it's not split, it's not cracked. That's where it seats down onto the breech. We also want to inspect for any damage, if it's split, if it's cracked, anything like that. We want to make sure that we're removing the breech cover. We simply push this back on and lock it in a downwards position. You can use the firing cap to assemble and finish the assembly here by simply turning the firing cap, and that will bring it down to its proper seat. It should rest so the bottom of the firing cap, or the breech cover, is to the top of the thread. For reassembly, we simply take the bolt, black buffer, red buffer, and black buffer. We push that in and extend it. I take the locking ring, I put the locking ring on its seat and make sure that it's laid properly onto the seat. I then assemble. Hand tight on this particular component, the breech and barrel, is sufficient. You don't need to wrench this tight. The last part is now we reseat the bolt properly using the cap. We push the bolt back in. That's the cleaning procedures for the bolt, the barrel and breech assembly. Now we're going to show you the cleaning and maintenance procedures for the retractable C-type stunners, automatic bolt retraction system. First, we'll start with the barrel breech assembly. It's important to note before I take the retractable sleeves off, the bumpers, it's important to note that the first one on and the last one on take the most abuse. They will wear much faster than the others. So it's important when you take this particular type of device apart that we make sure that we identify those by setting them off to the side. And we're going to put them in a different position when we reassemble. So these are the components of the retractable C-type stunner. Let's start with the barrel. First and foremost, we want to inspect it and clean it. Cleaning it, we're going to use a steel brush. We're going to clean it out. Using a drill helps with rotation and for cleaning. Once completed, we're going to take a shop rag. We're going to clean it out. We want to inspect the bore hole to make sure it's good and true, nice and round. We don't want it ovaled out. And then we want to also just inspect for any hairline cracks or any other problems that may arise from heavy use. Notice there is an exhaust port located here. We want to use some type of a pick device or a sharp instrument, and we want to be able to clean that out of any debris, whether it's dirt, whatever it might be. We want to clean that exhaust port out. Next, we're going to look at the sleeves. Again, these were the first and last on. We want to take a dry rag, and all we're going to do is we're going to wipe these. We don't want to use any oils. They're very soft. So we want to make sure we inspect for any splits or cracks or any other damage to them. Typical wear is on the inside diameter. You'll start to see it hollow out and wear out from the inside and then wear back across. So we'd inspect all 8 of those sleeves, the cushions. We're going to clean and inspect the penetrating rod. We want to make sure we use some type, I recommend a green scratch pad. And we're going to clean the piston end of the bolt. Make sure we get all excess, any unburnt gunpowder residue, or any other debris off. We're also going to clean the shaft of the bolt to make sure it's clean so we can inspect the shaft of the bolt for any pitting or any damage to the bolt. We want to pay close attention to the penetrating end of the tool of the bolt. We want to make sure that we know that this is nice and sharp. Never use any kind of material that would remove metal, emery cloth, sandpaper, grinder, wheel, anything like that. We never want to use that on the outside diameter of the bolt. It's the inside that's sharp. We also want to make sure that we clean and inspect the hollowed out portion. It's hollowed out to about 5/8 of an inch. We want to remove any debris that can build up inside that part of the bolt. Next, we have a flange washer. This is the first piece of the assembly on the bolt. We want to simply clean that using a dry towel. Typical wear is on the inside diameter of that particular washer, the flange washer. One way to test that is when it's in position, it doesn't have much movement. If we see this type of movement as you see here, we would want to replace that. We want to make sure it's good and tight at the base is where we want to test that. Next, we have the stop washers. Those rest on top of each other. Typical wear is on that inside diameter. It will start to wear out. Same thing is true here. We're just going to use a washcloth. We're going to clean them and we're going to check them for any cracks or splits or excessive damage on that inside diameter. We also have a locking O-ring. This is designed to hold the breech assembly and the barrel together, to lock it together. We want to inspect it, clean it. If it's got any splits or cracks or gouges in it, we're going to replace it. If it's overly thin, we want to replace that particular piece. The breech itself, we're going to inspect to make sure that the extractor is working properly. If this is working properly, we get free movement. I don't take that apart. There is a compression spring and a plunger. Simply compress the plunger and pull the cap off, replace the spring, and put it back together. We want to inspect the inside diameter. Again, there are 3 machined areas inside. We want to check those, and we want to also inspect above those rings to verify that we have no damage inside the breech. To clean, we can use the steel brush to clean. If there's excess buildup, We also have a brass brush that comes with it. That's a little lighter if it's light debris buildup. And we can clean that using that. Take a rag and we can wipe it clean. If desired, you can use some gun cleaning oil, put it on the rag, and wipe it on the inside to give it some lubrication. Have the breech locking cover. This is a rubber cover that locks the breech and firing cap assembly together. We want to make sure that we inspect this particular part, especially the seat ring here. It's about 5/8 of an inch in. We want to make sure it's not split or cracked or broken. We also want to make sure there's no damage to the outside circumference, any pieces missing around that area that could cause it to be loose. This should be good and tight when it's assembled onto the breech itself. So reassembly of this particular tool, first thing we'll do is we're going to take the breech, we're going to put the cap back together, put the locking cover back on, and notice I've got it seated all the way so it's flush to the top of the threads. It does not move, it doesn't slide off and on. That's in proper working condition. Next we'll put together our bolt assembly. First on is the flange washer, and then we're going to put our sleeves back on. And note, we take the two first on, first off. We're going to put those in the middle to rotate the wear. Put these back together as such. Next, we'll take the stop washers and place those onto the bolt assembly. We will then take the bolt assembly and place it into the barrel. Take the locking ring, place it over the top, and I want to make sure I've got it properly seated. And then we will assemble the breech. Hand tight is sufficient for the breech barrel assembly. That's the cleaning and maintenance on the retractable system. Next, we'll disassemble and clean the firing cap assembly. There are two flats on the inner safety. We're also going to take the cap trigger just lifts out. And here we have the components of the firing cap assembly. Starting from the top down, first you want to inspect the actual pull cap. You want to verify the height of the pull cap here. If you've got excessive damage, excessive use with the pull cap, typically you'll see this to wear down. It can wear down to about 1/4 of an inch or more. If that happens, we want to make sure that we replace that firing cap, or pull cap, I'm sorry. We also want to inspect it for any cracks or anything on the exterior part. We want to verify also that there is an O-ring in place on the inside top of the cap here. The O-ring basically protects the metal-on-metal contact between the bushing and the inside of the pull cap, and it simply seats here. Next is the pull buffer. The pull buffer is basically a shock absorber, and what it does, it absorbs the shock of the firing pin coming back up, so it rides basically on the top of the firing pin. This is typical wear on a new one. These will actually break down and start to shred. What you want to do is, if it's wore excessively over halfway, we want to replace that pull buffer. The next part is the bushing. We want to inspect it, make sure all the threads are good. We want to especially pay attention to the inside diameter of the bushing to make sure that that inside diameter is not oblonged, it's nice and true and round. We want to make sure that we've got good travel on the firing pin itself. It's as simple as a rag, just to clean that up and inspect it and clean it. The split collars are designed to hold everything in place as we put it together. It makes no difference how they go in together. We want to inspect them to make sure that there's no, again, splits or cracks or thinning of the wall from inside to outside. These can be repaired or replaced in sets. They're sold in sets. The safety cap. The safety cap, there's three components to this particular safety cap: the inner safety, the outer safety, and then there's a roll pin that holds everything together. As long as this is in operating condition, we want to continue to use that safety as is and not disassemble it. We will go through a disassembly on this a little later in the video. The firing pin spring. The firing pin spring is designed actually to cause the firing of the tool. These will set with time. You'll start to see curvature. What you want to do is, if you have any breakage of the spring or any other damage to the spring, we'd replace that. Cleaning is simply with a rag. The firing pin itself, what we want to do is we want to inspect. We're going to clean. We want to inspect these two ledges on the firing pin itself. With time, they will start to wear round. What we want to make sure that we have a good, true, solid turn off on that. What causes that rounding is the relationship of the trigger. The relationship of the trigger when the tool is not in fire mode, it's in this position. When it's cocked, you can notice these kickouts actually come up and cover that side of the trigger. It's now in fire mode. So as you squeeze the trigger, the firing pin rolls off. It rolls off. That's where you can get the wear here. So we want to inspect that for wear. We also want to inspect the positioning ring to make sure that that's in good working condition and not wore. The positioning ring actually puts it in the proper position to fire the tool on the rim of the cartridge. So as it's traveling down, it strikes the trigger and slides over. So you can see damage on that positioning ring. The actual point of the firing pin is blunted. It's not a direct sharp point. It's purposely made that way so that we get more surface coverage on the rim of the cartridge, and we have a better strike point, a larger strike point that way on the cartridge itself. The trigger, we want to inspect the trigger for wear on the inside diameter here, and then also on what I would call the kickouts or positioning kickouts for the firing pin. These little kickouts will wear down and back. So we want to make sure we're inspecting those, and again, we're inspecting the inside diameter here. Notice there is heavy grease here. We do want some lubrication to assist in the travel on the metal on metal travel. But we'd want to just inspect that and make sure that those are in good working condition and not excessive worn. The breech cap, there is an O-ring positioned at the bottom of the threads. We want to make sure that that's in good working condition. It's not frayed. The threads, it's recommended that we use some type of a thread grease so that we don't get the threads cinched together. It's important to note on the bottom inside, there is a surface area that should be cleaned. We use a pick to clean that particular surface area of any excess debris that might accumulate there. We can take a rag, we can put the rag down through and clean the barrel end of it. To clean that out. And then we just inspect it for splits, for cracks, anything else that may have happened to it. We also want to inspect the firing pin discharge hole. That's where the firing pin comes through. We want to make sure we've got a good round surface there, no bulging or any excess damage that way on that inside face. So we're going to reassemble the firing cap. We're going to start with the firing pin. We're going to place the firing pin spring. The safety assembly will go on. We're going to take the bushing, set it on the table, and we're going to compress the spring to expose for our split collars. And again, these do not have to go in any particular position or order. And we release, and now everything is locked together. So next, we're going to install the pull buffer. We'd go in here. We're going to take the pull cap, and notice the O-ring is in position. And we're going to assemble. Hand tight as far as we can. We've got the firing cap assembly partially put together. We're going to take the trigger spring, place the trigger spring in the end of the trigger, and in an upwards position, notice the difference on the two sides of the trigger. We want the cutout or upper part to go in an upwards position into the firing cap. We're going to assemble. At this point of assembly, if you've got a tool that's been used, we would take the part of the firing pin that has the most wear on it, and we would want to make sure that it is positioned towards the button as we assemble. So we would put in, squeeze the trigger, and we're going to hand tight for now. So everything is assembled. We would then take some type of an adjustable wrench or wrench, and we would tighten the inner safety down, and then we would also take two wrenches and tighten the bushing onto the cap here. Fully assembled. We're going to show the components of the safety, the mechanical safety. There are actually 4 components to the safety: the outer safety, the roll pin, the inner safety, and notice there's an O-ring at the base of the threads. So when we have this fully disassembled, have to replace a part, we want to make sure the O-ring is in good condition, it's not split, it's not frayed. If it is, we're going to remove that O-ring and put a new one on. Typical damage that causes problems with this safety is on the inner safety. If you'll notice this inner area of the notch, a lot of times this inner area can break off. That's where you would maybe have to replace the inner safety. Most issues are with the roll pin. The roll pin will actually break off, and you'll find a piece inside that channel. So this is typically the part that needs to be replaced on the safety. So we're going to go ahead and put this together. If you'll notice on the inner safety, the top of the inner safety, there's a dimple machined into the top face. What we want to do is we're going to take our outer safety cap and we're going to line up the notch over top of that dimple, and we're going to start threading from that point, and we're going to thread it all the way to the fire point. What that does is that lines up for our roll pin to be seated properly down into the channel, so it lines up the inner safety with the outer safety. We're going to take that and set it on a solid surface. We're going to take a small pliers to hold the roll pin, place it in the hole, and then we're going to hammer this flush, and now we have repaired our safety. Next, we're going to demonstrate the proper use, loading, and firing of the C-type Jarvis stunners. Note, it's important that anyone that uses any of the cartridge-fired stunners, captive bolt tools, should wear eye protection and ear protection. We want to verify that the firing cap is in a safe mode. We're going to pull and cock the stunner and lock the firing pin in place. We're then going to load the power load into the chamber, and we're going to assemble the tool. Please note, we don't ever recommend air firing the tool. This is for training purposes only. We would prefer that you shoot into some type of a mass of a tire or some type of a device to capture the bolt, if you will. So we are now in ready position to use the tool. The next thing to do is to rotate the safety into a fire position. Hold the tool properly, and we're going to squeeze the trigger to fire. When completed, we rotate our safety back to safe position, remove the firing cap assembly. Notice rim fire. We're going to lay to the side and pull on the extractor and take our spent cartridge out, lay it to the side. On the clamp retain systems, the bolt is not designed to retract in for the next shot. The proper procedure is to take the firing cap, place it on the end of the bolt, and push it in. We're going to demonstrate the proper operation and use of this C-type retractable stunning device from Jarvis. Please note, it's important for anyone that uses any type of captive bolt tool should wear eye protection and hearing protection before use. Next, we're going to make sure that our tool, the firing cap, is in safety position. We're going to cock the tool so it's ready for fire there. We're going to take the power load and insert it into the chamber. Then we're going to assemble the firing cap onto the breech. Make sure it's tight here. It is not recommended ever to air fire the captive bolt tools. We are doing this only for demonstration purposes. We do not condone this in the field. To make fire, we're going to rotate our safety to the fire mode here. Point the muzzle end of the tool away from us and squeeze the trigger. To disassemble, first we're going to rotate back to safety, put the tool back in safety, the firing cap, disassemble. Notice the firing cap, the cartridge has been struck. Lay it sideways, use the extractor, and pull the cartridge out. Notice on the self-retracting tool, the bolt automatically resets itself for the next shot.